Great. So, once again, thank you for letting me interview you. Really, the first question I have is just an introduction of who you are and if you're comfortable, how long you've been in Bristol for and like what you do now.
Cool, for sure. My name's Phil Morris. I've been working in music, both as an artist and foremostly a promoter since about 2004. That was over in West Sussex, and moved over to Bath actually to study creative music technology over in 2009. At which point I started becoming more involved professionally in music, running a couple festivals, several different events brands, started a record label as well as my degree. And in my last year went on to work at a music agency in London. None of these things are in Bristol yet, but the funny thing is I actually wanted to be in Bristol at the beginning of all of that, but I couldn't quite get into that university and Bath had a different course. But all of this was building up to moving to Bristol, which I did in 2012. And from being in Bristol 2012, I started working at a concert agency and promoting events, primarily club night events, but a few gigs as well, and a few audio-visual shows. Since 2012, we were doing that in Bristol. Up until, about March 2020. And that's most of my experience in a kind of nutshell. Pretty much, right now, I'm taking a break from work and I'm working on my own music. I'm currently working on a couple albums and also doing a few freelance projects, some music consultancy. I work with local radio station as well, 1020 Radio, and help them with business strategy and some marketing as well. Right now until about September, working on my own music and also write a blog as well.
Oh, that's really cool. Okay, so thank you for introducing yourself. So this one's a bit more specific for music. What is your relationship with music? You mentioned what you've done, but like what's like your personal, you've made the music, what's your relationship? What have you experienced during music technology and how just music as time went on? So yeah,
relationship with music, it's probably a bit too close a relationship actually. I think most of my life I've put maybe a bit too much of myself into it.
fine.
I mean it's like a passion. There's definitely been points where everything in life is tunnel visioned towards music, and that sounds a bit vague and abstract, and I've been trying to think about what that really means, like what that passion means. And I think what that's turned into, what I've realized over the past few years, is that I find that music is a really unique kind of global language which can communicate social ideas and cultural ideas, and also helps formalize them in time. So it's kind of helps build a timeline of culture and society. And I think to be able to increase the amount of that happening from people who are musicians or people who just engage with music in order to tell a cultural story is what I'm really passionate about. Less so the genre and the style and the function, but more so the overarching state of play of culture where it's at. Whilst I try and do everything I can with music and engage myself, whether it's like DJing or writing or like artist management or anything like that, I think the relationship is ultimately it's a cultural one. It's helping to allow people to express themselves and contribute to global culture as a whole, helping people do that as well as doing it myself.
So really the next question is if you also have memory of it, but what are your thoughts, this is very vague as well, but what are your thoughts on the music scenes in the 1900s, so from the 50s to the 90s in other words? So was there any specific genre that really popped out to you? Was it variety? And
For real, it's a good question, because that's going to change decade by decade based on the regions in the UK. But for me, a big driving influence in my life, and also why I went to Bristol And also what I think is one of the largest changes in British music and global music as a result of that, is I guess it's the Afro-Caribbean influence that came in the 70s, was just made a monumental difference on music culture on the whole. And there's certain hubs in the UK. I mean, in the major cities, there was a big influx of Afro-Caribbean immigrants who brought all sorts of different kind of musical styles together, and who brought all sorts of musical styles to the country. And whilst, when you have that kind of influx of new cultures, there's going to be like segregation. But what happened quite quickly, from what I understand, in working classes, was because of the areas where people were living, a lot of these kind of cultures came together and ended up creating the basis, like the bedrock of a lot of the music that we have today on the radio, like dance music, electronic music. It all comes, not all, but like it largely comes from this sound system culture that was imported over in the 70s. And Bristol, obviously, it has a rich history from the Afro-Caribbean music culture and the sound system culture. We still have it, with St. Paul's Carnival that runs today, that keeps it alive. And there's certain genres such as like trip hop, which was more so in the 90s, that are attributed to Bristol. But some people may not realize a lot of that came from the kind of US hip hop influence that was coming in around the 80s, really bringing loads of things together there. And funnily enough, actually, the industrial music had a large part to play with that. Mark Stewart is from Bristol, and Mark Stewart performed in several bands. I know most of his solo work, but he pretty much invented industrial hip hop, which comes from this. It comes from this lineage, which I believe was started by a label called On New Sound in London. What's his name? Adrian Sherwood produced a lot of this music, and Adrian Sherwood was really famous for bringing together punks and reggae, and bringing together electronic music and ska, and just building these whole new cultural hybrids that couldn't have existed were it not for this Afro-Caribbean immigration into the country. Obviously, I realise that Bristol has quite a established kind of chamber, classical, and jazz scene as well, which I'm sure there's many people who can like elaborate further on that. But for me, the reason that I wanted to come to Bristol was because of this bass music, the sound system culture, the Afro-Caribbean influence that's here, and is just so important to UK music culture, and now the whole global music culture as a whole. That's what I think of Bristol in terms of 1900s music.
Yeah, the sound system, it was like it's usually like categorized as the Bristol sound, especially with like the Caribbean sound system, trip hop, drum and bass, and just all that hybrids together. And I guess that was like one of the main reasons why I wanted to start, because like the whole basis of sound system, if you go on a very simple definition of what the Bristol sound is on Wikipedia, they were mentioning about how it was due to like how they were fed up of like mainstream kind of stuff always being out there, being promoted, and like not giving light to like all the smaller types of genres and like the ones that are lesser known. So that's how kind of like and obviously the lack of culture in the mainstream kind of music back in the 1900s. So with the Bristol sound, how like using the sound system of Caribbean music like drum and bass, reggae, I believe ska was part of it, but and just all that fun, like that's the whole fusions of just different types of genres on piling on top of each other, and like experimental music as well. I think that's like what Bristol is really well known for. Like it's amazing how like in the past, because I was talking to someone about this as well. Sorry, I may mention I may be referring back to previous interviews I had. So like I remember you mentioned about the classical and jazz, and I did interview two people who were into the classical and jazz world. But yeah, like in that place, it was so normal. But like with like rock, punk, with the just lesser known, it was just so hidden under. But that's kind of what made Bristol in regards to the music scene. And like it's nice to know now that, because there was another interviewee, he had a lot of memories from the 1900s, and he mentioned how like it was seen as like a taboo then, but like it's quite cool now that it's not seen as a taboo, it's seen as part of Bristol.
It's really interesting. Like Bristol is, I guess it's open-minded in that sense. I mean, you know, like classical music, I don't think there's a better or worse here. Like, but it's important to remember that it's fundamentally rooted in like a musical language, notation, which is written by like German and Austrians hundreds of years ago. You know, and not everyone is able to be brought up in an environment where they can learn that language, like learn sheet notation and learn these older ways of making music. So you have to make your own path. And I guess that's where the taboo comes from. Is it real music if it's not written on notation and stave? These were questions that were being asked, you know, about 100 years ago. Is it authentic? And this was why in the US, like when like free jazz, you know, started coming about, it was quite taboo in itself, because it was taking some aspects of jazz which were quite rooted in traditional composition structures and just ripping it apart and throwing it on the table. Is it real jazz? Is it real music? I think now that time has gone on and such amazing work has been made by breaking these like traditionalist rules, there's no question about it. Of course it's real music.
Yeah.
But yeah, back in like the 50s and prior to that, yeah, people weren't too sure if it was. And I think that's probably a class thing as well.
Yeah. You're right about the class thing. With the classical music, from the interview I had with a lady who was into the classical period, she mentioned how like when she would go to like classical events, it was seen as such a formal thing. It wasn't seen as a way to like, it was, in other words, it was in a traditional method. You wouldn't see a lot of people listening to this because it was seen as like an expensive, you have to dress up, it's a way you go in and it's expensive. And like now, considering that most people are open-minded, and especially with how interactive it is and how we've broken stereotypes and like traditional ways of creating music, it's become more informal, and in a way it's become more open to people due to that open-mindedness. And due to that open-mindedness and allowing people to not go the traditional route of making music, it's still considered as classical music, no matter how different it is now. So that's a really lovely thing about like this generation. Everyone's very open-minded. But yeah.
anything goes now. It's great and also daunting.
Yes, it is. Daunting is a very good word for it as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so with the next question, this is pretty much the same question, but with now, as in from 2000 onwards. So what are your thoughts with the music scenes? I mean, we kind of did go over it a little bit, but like overall, what's your thoughts of it, of the Bristol music scene now?
I mean, I was working as a promoter throughout this period of time and seeing the changes, particularly with like social media and the increase in private contractors building like student accommodation and the increase of international students and the business of higher education. I feel that like and this isn't just exclusively to Bristol, this is like something that's happening all over the UK, I think. I think there's been a dialogue between the industry of higher education and the styles and potential homogenization of music in commercial settings. Just simply because there's such a high turnover of new audiences. Every year you have like several thousands, several hundreds thousands. I don't know how many people attend the unis like every year, new students. But you have this like constant turnover of of young people who are, this isn't an insult at all, but like relatively impressionable, because they come to a new environment, they want to experience a culture they haven't seen before, and they can be given that, and they want to engage, they're enthusiastic, it's a beautiful thing. And when there's this much opportunity, culturally and economically, there becomes a market, and this market, you can follow rules to succeed in a market, you can follow patterns, and a lot of the time to get the acceleration, get that pattern working, is largely driven by marketing. So I guess what I'm saying is that as the population of the city has increased and the culture of the city has brought in more and more people, I feel that there have been some large organizations and just a general maybe subconscious leaning towards from promoters and music businesses to kind of appease and to market to this new audience in the most efficient way possible. So what you end up having is end up having quite a lot of like student night. You have certain DJs, for example, in the larger clubs who play these student circuits, and they'll go around the UK, and this isn't necessarily a bad thing, but you'll have these same lineups with these same kind of borderline commercial, perhaps radio friendly artists that are relatively non-offensive and can speak to wide demographics of people and sell tickets, and they're booked on that reason more so than the cultural programming of it. And this has happened, you see this, all you need to do is look at the large 1,000 plus capacity clubs across the UK and make an average of what lineups are playing there, and the ticket prices to see if they're matching up with kind of student budgets. And you'll see that there's a kind of pattern with certain performers who will come and play. That doesn't represent the whole music scene at all. So I'm just talking about the larger economics of it and the more commercial demographics. I feel that it has been homogenized. I think you could say that, all over the country, to be honest. You'll have certain promoters who can't take the risk marketing, certain kinds of music and certain performances to large demographics, because a lot of promoters, a lot of music business works on like a razor's edge anyway financially. And because there's been so much of an influx of people, whilst there's a lot more to gain, there's a lot more to lose as well. So I guess that's a really long explanation of saying that I think it's become a lot more student focused, which at large is relatively homogenized. But I will say that the quality of the homogenization these days is pretty good. I mean, you can put on, you can go to, man, don't listen to me too much because I'm like 31 years old now. I ain't been in uni for a long time now. But when I go to like events marketed at like younger people, I find there are quite a lot of music styles, etc. I guess it's just really who and how people are monetizing off that has really informed what music we have at large. This said, so now there's another part to this. So then you have like the more underground scenes, and which I think are just absolutely thriving. And I've spent majority of my time working in the underground music scenes, whilst maybe professionally working in more mainstream ones. And I found that the students and the younger demographics who come in often have the most enthusiasm and energy and are most willing to take the risks with forward-thinking, diverse and really multicultural lineups. I've found that to be a huge case. The sad thing is they don't often last very long because people are doing it maybe for the first time, or they're using loan money to do it. So it's like a limited fund, or they don't know the business. Fair enough. These things are temporary, but there's a really big experimental kind of left field underground music scene that comes from that increased student demographic, not just the students, but I'm just using that because it's just such a massive turnover that happens every year. It's easy to point at that.
Yeah.
But it's not exclusively that by any means. But some of the most exciting brands, events, and individuals, curators that I've seen in the music scene have been students who've come in and just been shown all this different cultures, shown all these opportunities, and really expressed themselves with it. The sad thing is that in the 2000s, particularly the last 10 years since I've been in Bristol, a little bit before, the counterbalance to this, so this is the last part of my answer, the counterbalance to this is that because this homogenization that I mentioned in the beginning, it's been really difficult for smaller venues to consistently succeed and to consistently have profit, which has been able to finance these more far-leaning events. So I couldn't even begin to tell you the amount of venues that have closed over the past 10 years in Bristol. And even when I first started coming to Bristol, I was working in events, started promoting, working as a booking agency, and it was almost, I mean, if you go on the Bristol Promoter Forum on Facebook, I don't know if it's still there. I haven't had Facebook for a long time. That's a great place to check out what the music scene is saying. There's there's been a massive, like, it's kind of like a underlying joke that there's no venues in Bristol for around the 100 to 300 capacity mark, which is the real mark for like breakthrough artists like that. I mean, that's the real kind of amount of people to potentially make a financially successful show with a breakthrough artist, that kind of 100 to 300 capacity mark. And there isn't really venues which have reputation or the equipment or are located well enough or the licensing to provide and facilitate these shows. You still have them, but it's a lot less than there was like prior. And running a venue is a lot more expensive now. Getting licenses is a lot harder. And because of this more widespread homogenization from larger venues, booking surefire events constantly, you know, if you take away 1,000 tickets in one night, just on this one safe event, that's 1,000 people who might not be going to like smaller events. And the effect that's had on Bristol, I've seen it. I mean, that promoters have had to really think outside the box to bring new music into the city, and often they lose money and they have trouble continuing their brand and like developing their message and expression because of just the economics of it. I hope that gives, I think that's my answer. I hope that gives a bit of insight.
That's a very good, like, thank you, because like the last interview I had, she pretty much mentioned the same thing, but you mentioned it in way more detail in why this could be happening, why smaller venues are like kind of closing down, especially with the whole brand of students coming in, especially with a massive amount of people coming in with like University of West England and Uni of Bristol, just having thousands of people coming in every year. And because they want to appeal to that audience, bigger venues are kind of leading the market in that way, in the music scene. So it makes sense. And it's harder for smaller venues, especially since they do very different things compared to like the common like pop music and such like that. It's difficult for them to continue. So that totally makes sense. That's a very nice answer. Thank you that you divided it into 3 parts as well. That's a very nice way to answer it.
That's all right. And I'm super passionate about this in Bristol, really, really am. And I just need to give an absolute massive shout out to Strange Brew, because I don't know how they're doing at the moment with this lockdown, but a lot of the music scene, like the peers that I've had since I've moved there, Strange Brew opening up has, and unfortunately closing because of this, has just been like the burning torch, like the light, a bit of a light in the darkness. That's a 300 capacity venue with an amazing team who just have best programming. It was mostly crowdfunded by the music scene to make it happen, and hopefully we can get more of those venues because that's exactly what we need.
Yeah. Wow. Like, thanks to you and the last interview I had, I didn't actually realize how, I mean, I knew that the underground scene is like a very big part of Bristol, but I didn't know how much it's struggling, especially in today, as in this, I mean, this generation, because you'd assume that because it's part of Bristol, it would still be like okay, but like you don't actually think in detail about like the struggles it's going through with the amount of students and how like people are going for like the same kind of things, especially with like education, how it doesn't really value a lot. The last interview she mentioned how like with also with the student accommodations that venues have to like focus so closely on like sound rules, and like there's a lot of complaints, and yeah, and it just gets harder for the smaller venues. So it's really interesting to know that as much as it's part of Bristol's identity, like when people look into Bristol and they go into like any kind of like tourism website, the Bristol sound will be kind of like there at the front page, but like you don't realize that there's so much struggles that smaller venues, small bands are going through to keep that image alive. And it's interesting. It's really interesting. I want, what's a better word for interesting, because I know it's interesting. It's really it's fascinating. It's fascinating to just know that it's in other words, I didn't realize until yesterday, and like obviously you giving me more information, that it's starting to like broaden up my perspective of this. And I'm glad you told me about this, because I never actually saw this online. They don't really talk about this online. So yeah.
It is just another elaboration just about that student accommodation, right? So when the island first opened up, before it had a license, we were doing shows there, and like the bar was just like a little table in the corner with some beers under it, that kind of thing, right? And it could open up quite late, and eventually they got like a proper license, right, to operate as a fully functioning bar and venue, and that license ran until it meant that they had to close at 3 a.m. And we actually had not big complaints, but minor complaints, and had difficulty kind of justifying the ticket prices we needed to sell the events, because the club closed that early. And do you know why they got the 3 a.m. license rather than the 4 or 5 a.m.? The reason for that is because what's it called on Nelson Street? Is it SWX or something, like opposite?
Yeah.
Just in the middle of town, opposite the island, whatever the big one is. It's because they didn't want to cross over the leaving times for that venue, because they thought it would be too messy and too much to police. So they gave later license to the larger, much more commercial venue, which meant that the island was losing out on, quite a lot of money, and it would be harder for promoters to promote longer term shows there because it closed early, because the priority went to the larger student kind of commercial venue. But I think the island's still doing well, but still, that's just a bit of insight into one of the small chips away that can happen.
It kind of mix of politics when you think about it, because like the politics of like the bigger company being more like valued compared to like the smaller one as well, which but
more muscle. It's like when they're going to close Thekla, like Thekla was under like risk of closure because they were building like some new flats opposite, or they were extending the flats opposite.
Oh no.
They were going to close Thekla just for that, and it was like I'm pretty sure everyone kicked off so hard they stopped it, but it got pretty close to the line to save Thekla campaign for this, maybe like 6 years ago or something.
Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah. Wow.
Just so that they could like extend the flats opposite. Ridiculous.
I guess like the main politics is really about the like extensions of like the flats and like people moving in as well, because like with more people coming in and them creating more accommodation, it really puts a lot of the just music venues at risk. Like I haven't been in Bristol long. I've only come here because of I'm a student, and I know Thekla as like a very well-known music venue. So it kind of it's actually quite surprising to me that Thekla was going to be shut down due to accommodation. Like a venue that knowledgeable. Like I don't go to clubs much, but I know of that club. I know of that venue. So it kind of surprises me. So it's really like it's weird how like something that big can also be affected. So yeah.
Yeah, man. Yeah, it's developers, like property developers, yeah, they don't care about the cultural value of something like a venue. I don't put them down personally for that, but it's just money muscle. That is all it is, you know.
Okay, so this is kind of focusing more on the politics. So the next question is about your thoughts on politics in Bristol. Do you think people in Bristol, do you think Bristol itself is vocal or quiet about their political views, and do you think it's reflected in their music?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is. I'm just trying to quantify a little bit how I think that is. And there's so many reasons why, compared to perhaps, you know, the wider country at large, like why it is. So I think anywhere that has like a big immigrant population, like no matter how many generations through that is, it is going to be political, because the politics of why that happened like extends potentially back hundreds of years, but most certainly will be in the memories of people still living today. And a place that's so as a result of any kind of immigration, you're going to have a multicultural environment, and the generations that come from that are going to be, I would like to think, more open to multicultural environments and more protective and supportive of them, and more used to them. And when you have that kind of experience, and you've engaged with maybe different communities or used to different communities, I think it's pretty much unavoidable for things to get political with like most things that you do, ideally in a positive way. I mean, then we have one of these cultures that are immigrating in, could say, are the students. I think that politics and students, students protesting, and young people on the whole, not even necessarily students, but student environments are great for people to discuss and learn and share new values and opinions, and people have at those ages, and with that knowledge available to them, have a lot of enthusiasm. They want to express themselves. They want to, stand up for what they think is right. They want to identify with things. And because Bristol is such a young, energetic city with so much of these different cultures, I think it is vocal. And we've seen a lot of that in the past couple of years, particularly. It's been crazy. Just to see, it's been really positive to see people have that passion and to keep it alive in a time where I think a lot of people have been feeling a little bit powerless, I think maybe not everyone feels politically powerless, but it's been a pretty rough 10 years in the UK politically. And I think it's been proved very much so that people are vocal in Bristol. How that relates to music, it's like going onto a website and you click a cookie request, and it says by going on this site you agree to XYZ. You click it anyway, whether you want that to happen or not, and whether you think that you've agreed to it, or whether you know or not that they're tracking your cookies on that website, it is happening. It's just a case of how much you choose as an individual to apply that and engage with it in your actions and your engagements with the music. It is definitely fundamental. So let's take a really bog standard example. Maybe this sounds a bit pompous, but there was it's a tech house, this really bland house music group in London. I can't remember who they are. It was a free piece and just completely, relatively just radio friendly, non-offensive sort of house music. You listen to it, you think, not necessarily political. I mean, how could that be political? And so, and there's two sides to this. There's the personal side of the people. So it turns out they were property developers, and they were responsible for buying out this market in London and which was a big community hub, and supported loads of people in the community. And despite being these touring DJs, involved in the music scene, in their day jobs, they were more than willing to basically damage like these cultural communities and almost live like two separate lives. So the point I make with that is, whether you see that music as political or not, there's probably more to the story than you realize. And then you add that to the rich history of house music on the whole, and to have these free property developers on the higher rung of earning money from their music, a style of music which fundamentally comes from like poorer, like minority demographics in the USA, and it comes, you know, from gay dance clubs and all this kind of stuff. And they're making the most money in a more homogenized version of it. Even by the act of like engaging with it to any degree, that history that is attached to it makes it political, like by default. Like the story is there. Just because you saw episode 3 doesn't mean that episode 1 and 2 didn't happen. Like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whether you want to research and know that and apply that to your engagement, yeah, I guess that'll inform how much you think political views are tied to it. But I would argue, perhaps pedantically so, that you look back far enough and like it is going to be political. And the more you listen to the music, the louder that message is. But if it's just surface value, then no, it doesn't have to be. I'm not saying that you know, it has to be political to you, but unless you're trying to like, you know, wipe away the history of something, I mean, like, it's going to be political. And as a result of that, you know, you see people push it further with their political message. You see people completely avoid it, like those property developers. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think it's very subjective, but in my personal opinion, at the end of the day, yeah, all art is
political. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I never actually thought about the like, because like pretty much your answer has been kind of like the same with everyone else. It kind of like music and the politics, no matter what kind of politics, whether it's as big as like the government to like small issues like local, like I know if you're going to change your local church or something, it goes hand in hand, in other words. And I guess one thing I didn't think about is like the story behind the music as well, considering how you mentioned the tech house. And obviously if it's something bland, and like most people won't think it's political, but then when you look behind the scene and realize that the artists are what they're getting rid of like communities, places. What? Okay. I mean, there's a lot more to it. And yeah, that's a good thing to think about, because like, yeah, in other words, it's super hard to like separate them from each other. In other words, like how you mentioned with cookies, like whether or not you agree or like such like that, it's going to happen. But yeah.
Yeah, just on another side note with it, it's like, you know, like the guy who wrote the Amen loop, who performed the Amen loop, which is like the drum loop used in like all, you know, it's the foundation of drum and bass. It's like a funk loop. I mean,
okay,
from what I understand to this day, so that's the most important drum loop in the history of music, without a shadow of a doubt. And to this day, it's been sampled by so much music, people of all sorts of cultures all over the world. And I'm on the understanding that he hasn't received any money for that, like because the legal framework that was put in place when he signed that recording contract back in the day did not entitle him to whatever XYZ royalties. And to this day, despite it being the most important drum loop in music in the modern world, hasn't received anything. So how can you listen to drum and bass and say that there's no politics involved when it's actually the whole genre was essentially built from the, let's say, people taking opportunistic legal frameworks which took away from this man. Do you see what I mean? I mean, I know it's pedantic to look that far back, but I just find it really troubling to say it's not political when there's so much history involved with it.
Yeah, no, it's hard to say that's not political.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I know.
Okay, so the next question is pretty much the same one, but like to do with culture. Yeah, with the culture of Bristol. So like your thoughts on the culture in Bristol. You've mentioned that there's a lot anyway, but like how diverse do you think Bristol is? And obviously, do you think that the culture is reflected in the music?
I think, yeah, Bristol's a really diverse place. I mean, perhaps relative to its size, you know, it's a big city, I suppose, and it's sort of in the sticks in the West Country. I'd say it's quite diverse in the centre, in like the central city kind of sections. Um, it doesn't have quite the size of somewhere like Birmingham in terms of diversity, you know. And I don't think that's necessarily because of the way the city is. I think it's really like a size thing. Bristol's big, but it's really condensed, like into the centre. And when you start getting out to like Knowle West, you know, the outskirts of Bristol, from what I've experienced, it isn't particularly diverse at all. It feels like a lot of the diversity is in the bang in the centre. Whereas, you know, if you go to like somewhere like Birmingham, you know, it's just such a massive city that diversity is more widespread. It's more industrially built up everywhere. So yeah, I would say it is a diverse city relative to its size, and unfortunately that means it's, you know, really in the centre. Whether it's reflected in the music, I mean, yeah, I'd say it. I'd say it is. I guess it depends what's meant by like the music. Like, is it the people who are making the music, so the artists, or is it to what people listen to? I think those are two kind of different things there. I'd say that like diversity, like it's having to measure that from an artist perspective, I'd say that there's a huge amount of diversity in Bristol. I think there's all sorts of musicians, instrumentalists, producers, DJs, all sorts, covering all sorts of different music there. Whether they're making it for the Bristol audience and it's reaching such a diverse demographic, like whether it's reaching like second generation working class Indians, you know, in living on the outskirts of Bristol, I don't really know that. And I would say that it's just from my personal experience, a lot of it speaks on a more it's a lot of the music culture seems to be speaking more on a global or national level rather than really making music for individual cultures and individual pockets of, you know, demographic in the city. I don't know how much of that there is, apart from perhaps sound system culture and the Afro-Caribbean music scene, which is most certainly reflected in the music, and that diversity there most certainly is, which is fair enough because like Bristol's quite well known for that. In terms of whether the music is reflected in a lot of other cultures, demographics, and that diversity is represented, I'm not entirely sure about that. I don't necessarily think so from my experiences, but I'd love to, love to learn otherwise.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair. I guess when you think about like diversity especially with like the cultural diversity, I guess the first thing, heck, even the first thing I thought of was really the like bang center, like Bristol, the city center. And when you go further out into like out into Bristol, it kind of doesn't make sense that, I mean, like obviously from my experience, I go to the out. I've usually, my campus is usually around the outskirts of like Bristol, so it's like in Filton. Though it's a lot of different people because of the students. It's not as diverse as it is in the complete center. So yeah, I totally get what you mean by that. But yeah, it's quite interesting to think about it as well, considering that like you mentioned how it also depends on like the listeners and the artists as well, because obviously there is a wide range of people making music, but who it's targeted to, who's actually listened to it, is also a very key factor into how it makes the music scene diverse. But yeah.
For sure. I mean, I will say as well, like from the promoters, particularly Bristol Beacon it's called now, right? Bristol Beacon, and you know, at Thekla as well, I think it's Matt Aitken, you know, who used to program Start the Bus. I think he still programs Bristol Beacon now. Has done like, and not just him, like there's so many other people as well have done an amazing job of bringing in so many different kinds of music, so many different music cultures to the city. Like, it's crazy. I'd say it's almost like indiscriminate, like what will be brought over, like culturally. But who goes to those shows, which might be like £20 a ticket, just to afford to bring the band in? Like, how diverse that is, I'm not entirely sure. And I don't think that's the fault of anyone except, just the cost of living, really.
Yeah.
I'd say there's a lot of culture available, and it is really diverse. Who actually has the opportunities to engage with that is like maybe a bit less diverse, but it is there, which is great. On 1020, like the amount of like young people who play all sorts of different music and are mixing together loads of different styles and really making that their thing. Like people who are trying to bring the Bristol sound and infuse it with Arabic music, and like some of the music from Detroit, whatever. Like there's a lot of openness there. Whether people on the street know that cultural mash is happening, I don't know, but the artists are definitely working on it, that's for sure.
I totally agree. I remember there was a event that my friends invited us to. It was like Afro style. It was an Afro style kind of like jazz event in a pub, and it was obviously it was diverse. It was bringing in Afro kind of features, and when looking at the crowd, there wasn't a lot of different people. It was like, if in regards to like the different types of people, it was like mainly British, like white British people, and to be honest, I didn't even know about it because my friends invited me, and it was in other words, it wasn't as diverse as you would hope it would be, considering that it was such a since it was such a cultural kind of music. But yeah, I totally get what you mean by that. But yeah.
You get it for sure.
Yeah. Next question is, obviously we've gone through it, but like just kind of like a summary, but do you think that the music scene goes hand in hand with politics and probably politics and culture today in Bristol, if not the whole of UK? And I think you've kind of like answered it already, but like just a quick summary.
I can just elaborate slightly on it, and I'll say that it does go hand in hand to maybe a larger degree than other cities, just on the basis that so many people come to Bristol for its music culture reputation, and it has such a prominent music culture that people who are facilitating that culture, being the music communities and scenes, the record labels, promoters and venues, they have a bigger platform to spread a message, because people are more willing to listen to their message because they've come to Bristol for the music. So, and it has that reputation, has that prestige. So I'd say it goes hand in hand a little bit further, because the music scenes and the facilitators of that have a louder voice to kind of share political messages. For example, with protests or marches that are happening, music scenes in Bristol that have like wide followings on social media, and they'll be able to share that message with a lot more people a lot quicker, because people are really engaging with them in their own lives outside of politics, that when they do say a political message, their fans are probably going to listen a little bit more. So yeah, I'd say it goes hand in hand, perhaps more so than other cities, just because the music scene has such a powerful reputation in Bristol. For example, it's like the radio stations like News and 1020, putting like such active, putting so much activity into supporting things like International Women's Day, for example, and educating these things that they are happening. I mean, some of these young people, or anyone really, some of these people might not know that even happened unless they followed a radio station on Facebook. They might not even know that holiday is happening. So they're reaching, new people who are more open-minded to political messages, who might not be looking for it on their own accord.
With like Bristol's reputation of it being a very like musical city, heck, in 2010, though it was a very long time ago, it was classed as a very musical city in relative to its size. It was classed as the most musical city in UK relative to its size. But to have that reputation, and for people to come because of that reputation, it kind of does make sense how it would go hand in hand. Well, especially when listeners come in and listen to the music, how like with Bristol also being known as a vocal place to like to relay their thoughts and opinions about certain issues such as like women's rights, LGBTQ, and just so many other things. It kind of, and also with the culture as well, especially with like with the Caribbeans, and just with the small different with people coming in, especially with when people came in during the 50s, when after World War II, and like people around in the Caribbean, in India, and like Africa came in to help work. Just all those fusion together, it kind of makes sense that they do go hand in hand. And with like radio stations and with the influence and that Bristol has, especially with the music scene, it kind of, they can spread that message. In other words, like you said, obviously with people who aren't looking for it themselves, they are finding it because of the influence of the music scene. But yeah,
I know people, and this is a good thing, I know people who have engaged and in some cases gone from one way of thinking to another about social issues, such as, you know, let's just say equality on the whole. Like they've had their opinions changed entirely because of the actions of influencers in the music scene. Like they wouldn't have thought about these things were it not for people in the music scene are seeing something they're passionate about. Were it not for them, like bringing these causes up, they wouldn't have engaged in it. I can say that as fact. You know, it's like if someone that you really look up to says, hey, check this out, you're probably going to check it out more than if someone that you have nothing, who you can't even relate to, tells you to do it. Do you know what I mean?
Like, yeah, no, that totally makes sense. Yeah, no. First thought that came to mind, though it's not Bristol related, was the whole 2020 like election with like Trump and Biden, like all these celebrities saying go vote. Right. Though they didn't say don't vote, though they didn't mention vote for this person, they did like influence people to start voting, which created such a massive statistical difference. Like it was like wasn't it like the most interactive year in regards to voting? So many people voted, and it was like the first time in history where there was like a sheer amount of people voting, maybe due to like obviously who are going up for the election, but I also want to say it's also due to like the encouragement of like celebrities, of people in the music scene, people in different scenes, influential people, in other words,
hugely
encouraging people to vote. And I get that kind of goes for like the Bristol scene, where like you said, so you wouldn't do anything that you wouldn't be interested if someone you don't know says to do it, unless it was like someone you did know. So yeah, that makes sense. So next question, do you think there is a difference in music influenced by politics and culture in this now compared to the past? It's a bit of a vague question, but yeah, do you think there has been a difference though?
Huge. The platform of social media has completely changed it. I mean, whether the music is influencing the politics or the politics is influencing the music, I mean, like from both sides. So people saying off the cuff things on social media, they can get very quickly, because that's like a stone tablet of like who you are as a person now. If you're a very influential person and you say something on social media, that goes down on record forever, sort of thing. So if you say something that's like say politically charged or like leaning one way or another, you can quite quickly get branded as having that opinion. I guess that's tying into like cancel culture. I worked with one artist who said kind of like off kilter joke, like and I personally think the joke was completely out of order, as did a lot of people. And it was relatively innocent, I could see that, but he basically got branded as one political opinion thereafter. And unfortunately, it was a political opinion that was not popular in the music scene he worked with it, and essentially lost a lot of traction who he was as an artist. I think that although like I feel a bit sorry for that because he's a bit of an older dude, let's say, and he wasn't used to how quick this happens, or like how influential, how much the music and politics are influencing each other and holding hands. Just because he didn't realize that doesn't mean that it's like a pass, like you have like this get out of jail free card. Just the way that things work now, people are influenced a lot quicker by things generally. And I think that, like, in terms of the actual music being written and created and promoted, I don't really think there's going to be like specific examples where that influence is really clear, but in terms of the actual work, I don't think so. I think around the music cultures and the way that people identify with themselves and the music and the culture, yeah, it's changed entirely because of the way that so many people can have a voice now. Like, everyone can have a voice as long as your message is strong enough online, and that is really influenced the scenes and cultures around the music, and potentially, you know, it's going to affect the music that's being written. But I think that's a lot harder to measure. Like, I don't hear many political anthems being written these days compared to back in the day. Things are a little bit vaguer now, and people aren't writing like, you know, straight up like screw Ronald Reagan kind of songs. You know, it's not happening anymore because I feel like a lot of people are able to voice their influence, their political influence, via different platforms, which are much better suited for it in terms of putting forward a straight up message. It's kind of made music a bit more fun in a way, I guess, you know, because it makes it more expressive without having to be so direct with your message. But yeah, I'd say it's really changed, largely because of social media.
What I've learned especially is that the culture of internet has changed a lot of things in regards to like the music scene. Like, one thing was like obviously how many people access the music compared to the past, where most people would just go to their local record store and pick out what's there, like with the help of like sites such as Spotify, YouTube and such, like just internet in general. Like, it's spread out completely to like worldwide. Anyone around the world can like access your music, no matter how big or small you are. It's just depending on how lucky, which is a crazy thing. And then obviously with the influence of social media, people are branded very quickly. And I guess that's another thing with the internet, is that things are done really quickly. Like nothing is slow on the internet. Something that is considered old could be like a month ago. Like, oh, that was such a month ago, when like in reality a month ago isn't that long. But yeah, and due to how quick social media is, the internet is, and the moment you get branded for something, it's hard to like scratch that off you. It's hard to like get that image off. And even though the internet is quick at doing something, it's very slow at, I guess, forgiving. In other words,
so it rarely does. Largely is for musicians.
Yeah, it's
like
really
a blessing, but it's like it's a totally different game to like when I started, which sounds like an old man sort of thing, but like it's, you know, it is totally different. It scares me. Flip this on its head, so flip it from the like politician's point of view, right? Donald Trump's last political campaign, where it was just the most like transparent like effort, like getting whatever rappers he could to perform at his rally in order to build that association. It's the same kind of thing with like a drink brand hiring a musician to promote their music. It gives a sense of authenticity, right? And really, you wouldn't have had that like 15 years ago, like Donald Trump getting Lil Pump to perform at his rally. That sounds ridiculous. Why does it work now? Because they can get loads of pictures and distribute them very quickly. And they're very interesting pictures because it's two total opposite people. Someone like Lil Pump with all the face tats and the braids and this, and Donald Trump next to each other. Impactful photo, made a marketing campaign made entirely for spread on social media. That is entirely for a political message. You know, it works both ways.
It does. It really does work both ways. Like, another thing I'm thinking of is literally the whole Hillary Clinton campaign. She like got as many celebrities as she could. I'm just remember her trying to dab all the time, just trying to be relevant, I guess. So the internet has a very huge impact in regards to like today's culture, and like with politics, with music, with culture itself. And so yeah, I have one more question, and this is really about
Cool.
the future of music and politics and culture. And I think it's kind of throughout this whole interview, it's kind of been established. And the question is, do you think that music and politics will still be together in the future?
Yeah. So I do quite a bit of web development and like digital marketing, and I've got a Facebook Blueprint certification. And I haven't used Facebook for years. And one of the reasons, despite having this paid for certification, that I don't like Facebook and are reluctant to use that certification to work, is because it taught me like the absolute depths. Same with Google Analytics, actually. My certification in that, it taught me the absolute depths of like, well, it taught me probably like the surface level of depth of data collection and profile matching, and how how you can create a digital profile of someone and market to very specific points of people's lives, potentially like emotional points of their lives, use their interests and triangulate that with other information to essentially send a message to them at the right time, all automated, or all led largely by artificial intelligence. The implications of that in political campaigns, unless there's some restrictions that happen in the future with politics being able to leverage social media and display advertising online, unless more regulations become quite clear on an international level, I think music and politics will still be together. I think they always will be, but it will take a really different form. And I feel that like with something like Spotify that's come up, like the payment model of Spotify, how that works, I won't go into that, but essentially what it's made is artists releasing albums loaded with songs. So there'll be like 20 tracks on an album, all about 2 minutes each, because you're going to make more money out of people completing listens for short songs on duration, rather than a smaller amount of songs with longer durations. You'll get more money that way. When you start thinking about like how that one bit of technology and one bit of software has changed how people are writing music and also distributing their music, then you take into account how different political campaigns or like marketing campaigns at large, whether it's selling a product or political message, can leverage data to reach certain people. I don't know what this is going to lead to, but until there's some regulation which prevents this data collection or restricts it, I find that politicians will probably start getting pretty smart with how they market people. So they might be able to find people who listen to a very like outsider style of music from a certain region, or perhaps there's a band which are spreading a message which is negative against a certain politician. It's more than likely, it's already happened, that they can collect that demographic of people, cipher them into a data profile, and then spread a counter message so that they can try and change the opinions of those people. So they can probably find people who don't agree with their message and create marketing campaigns to sway their opinion based on what music they listen to. I know that sounds pretty tinfoil hat, but we're seeing this already, like with the Trump campaign with Lil Pump. That's basically what that was, only in real life. Obviously, when they shared the images and they paid for the adverts, they had profiles of people who have these interests, and they're trying to reach people who didn't normally like Donald Trump. It's already happening, but the depth of how it will happen, I don't know. But yeah, it's going to be pretty messy, man, I think.
It actually reminded me of something. During the whole when Boris Johnson had his election, I was going through like YouTube videos, just very brief YouTube videos of the elections, but I had to work. So usually I play lo-fi music in the background.
Yeah, I know this one.
Yeah, I didn't know what was going on until I kept on hearing Boris Johnson's voice, and I was like, what's it playing now? YouTube recommended me like an hour-long video from the Conservative Party's YouTube channel of lo-fi music of Boris Johnson, and I was like, What? Okay. That's a way to campaign. And
That's
you
a
just see
great
in the
example.
comments, you just see the comments and it's like, what am I listening to? I'm digging it, but what am I listening to? But yeah, I was just like, wow, appealing much, yeah.
Here's one to check out as well. On that tip, it was part of the same marketing campaign, well, the same period of time. If you go on Resident Advisor and search for like Tory or conservative graphic design, just try and find the article they wrote, because they did it really well, where basically the Conservative Party released a series of social media visual marketing assets, right? Which were really modern and had like house music under the background and really cool like typography and stuff. And they received a lot of criticism because it was widely agreed that it was a direct rip-off of, was it Claire Fifi who did the visual identity for Rinse? No, it was Numbers, the record label in Glasgow, and perhaps Rinse FM. Basically, the Tories copied this really distinctive underground music graphic style and put house music under it and repurposed that to connect with younger audiences. And it was, if you compare the Resident Advisor has the two images next to each other, and they are so similar in graphic style that it's a bit shocking. It's like really transparent, but for a lot of young people who maybe aren't as clued in about like which graphic designer did what, they'll just absorb it and associate with it.
Yeah.
But the message there was, it was a little bit seedier because it was stolen, but it's a similar kind of thing.
I don't know how they probably did get someone to just make lo-fi music, but the way they are appealing to the younger audience in that kind of way, and especially with using the internet to kind of like get people to get this platform to recommend it to younger people, it's sneaky, but yeah, it works. Yeah.
Guilty as charged. I shared that Boris Johnson thing with a couple of other WhatsApp groups. I did say at the same time, this is what they want me to do. I'm aware of it, but you've got to see it.
You gotta see this, guys. Yeah, no, not gonna lie, I did share the video to like a lot of my friends, like, did you know that the Conservative made a lo-fi mix? It's not bad. But yeah,
it's pretty funny, but yeah,
it's quite funny. It really does. Okay, so that is all the questions I have for you. So once again, thank you for letting me interview. You've given me a lot of insights on like how like the difference between the music scene between compared to like the 1900s and 2000s, and just all the kind of like what could be affecting it and such. So you've given me a lot more insights on what I can research into, what I can kind of like look into more. So thank you.
Good interview, good questions, and yeah,